Good evening, Namaskar, Adab, Sat Sri Akal. I am Varun. I welcome you all to this new initiative called Vimarsh Cafe. And today we have a very important guest, Professor Manindra Thakur, who teaches at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. Professor Thakur, first of all, I would like to ask, what is this Vimarsh Cafe? And how is it linked to Foundation for Creative Social Research?
So, Varun, Foundation for Creative Social Research is an initiative taken by some professors and students to create a space outside the university for continuous dialogue on important issues. This foundation basically nurtures several ideas. One of the ideas that foundation is nurturing is creative theory. So, creative theory has been organizing conferences and seminars. It organizes a seminar with it's colloquium with Raza Foundation and India International Center, along with Marquise Society in the US. So this is one initiative. The other initiative is Religion, Spirituality and Consciousness Group, which organizes Rishikesh Dialogue on Consciousness. And the third initiative is Vimarsh Cafe. So idea is to take the research that we do in the university to common people through Vimarsh Cafe. This is a YouTube channel in which in this program we will invite scholars, mainly those who have completed their PhDs, and also other scholars to talk about the areas of their expertise in very simple language. And we would like that to be watched by common people and scholars and students to get the idea what kind of issues are being discussed in the university system. And also, I hope this will initiate a dialogue between people gradually. You know, in Indian intellectual tradition, there has been a system of producing three kinds of texts. One is expert, written by an expert for another expert of the same field. Another one is written by an expert for experts from other field. And third one is written by an expert for common people. I think Vimarsh Cafe aims at the third kind of knowledge production where we want to disseminate our knowledge among the common
So,
people
in a
and get
way,
feedback on that.
the dearth of resources that are there when it comes to insights for the PhD scholars who wants to prepare for PhD and who are doing their PhD. So this initiative of yours and Foundation for Creative Social Research is going to be an important aspect on that context.
Yes, both. One, of course, when the young scholars will be talking about their own work, I'm sure the other scholars will be benefited from that. The stress, the tension, the anxieties that scholars have while doing their PhD. It's very alienating time for people who are doing PhD, as you can't talk to many people. You have to focus on your work. But also, the knowledge that PhD scholars have produced or scholars in the universities have produced, how to take that to people. These are two dimensions of this program, Vimarsh Cafe. So we want to make it simple. हम लोग इसको हिंदी और अंग्रेजी दोनों में करना चाहेंगे ताकि भाषा की कोई दीवार नहीं हो और जितना ज़्यादा हो सके हम लोग इसको सरल बनाना चाहेंगे ताकि जो हमारा काम है, जो रिसर्च है हमारा, उसकी क्या उपयोगिता है आम लोगों के लिए, वो निकल के सामने आ सके।
सो मुख्य तौर पर आपका ये जो इनिशिएटिव है ये डिसेमिनेशन ऑफ नॉलेज के लिए बहुत बड़ा जो पीएचडी में जो नॉलेज प्रोड्यूस हो रही है जो जनरली लाइब्रेरीज तक सीमित रह जाती हैं उसमें बहुत उसका उपयोग होगा।
बिल्कुल, ये जो नॉलेज लाइब्रेरी तक सीमित रह जाती हैं, बहुत सारी किताबें नहीं छपती हैं और अभी जो हालात हैं किताबों के छपने में परेशानियां हैं क्योंकि पब्लिशर्स को प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है, तो ऐसे में हमें दूसरे तरीके ढूंढने पड़ेंगे नॉलेज डिसेमिनेशन के लिए। और चूंकि ये आसानी से हमें उपलब्ध है तो इस तरफ प्रयोग करने की ज़रूरत है।
सो एक तरीके से देखा जाए तो विमर्श कैफ़े क्रिएटिव थ्योरी का क्योंकि ब्रेन चाइल्ड है, तो जो क्रिएटिव थ्योरी का क्रिएटिव एस्पेक्ट है, वो यहाँ पर रिफ्लेक्ट होते हुए नज़र आएगा।
बिल्कुल, कोशिश ये की जाएगी कि जो क्रिएटिव थियरी में डिबेट्स चल रहे हैं हमारे बीच में, उनको भी हम इसमें लाएँ, क्योंकि ये डिबेट्स हमारे समाज में चल रही प्रक्रियाओं को समझने के बारे में है और एक परिवर्तनकामी समाज अध्ययन बनाने की कोशिश है। ऐसा सोशल साइंस जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव सोशल साइंस हो सके, जिससे परिवर्तन हो सके। नॉलेज का मतलब है कि उससे कुछ परिवर्तन होना चाहिए। या विद्या सा विमुक्त है, तो विमुक्ति के कारण विद्या हो, विद्या के कारण विमुक्ति हो सके, ये हमारा उद्देश्य होगा इस पूरे प्रोसेस में।
So without wasting any time, I welcome Professor Thakur.
थैंक यू वरुण।
Sir, uh, we have been reading your work since past many years now, and we have come across that you're majorly interested in Indian intellectual tradition and its intersection with the questions on religion and spirituality, as well as you have a very important parallel interest on Marxism and Indian religion, Indian intellectual tradition. So first of all, I would like to ask, how did your interest begin in this area, especially Indian intellectual tradition and Marxism?
Marxism became very attractive for us when we came to Delhi University. When I'm saying we came to, means a lot of us came from Patna University to Delhi. And before coming to Delhi, we were not exposed to Marxism. Rather, we were more or less anti-Marxist. But when we came to Delhi, we were taught by Professor Randhir Singh, who was a famous professor and freedom fighter. He used to be a student leader in Lahore, and he was an amazing professor. Not only that, he had a gift of oratory, but also he had the capacity to preempt our questions. So that introduced us to Marxism, and gradually we started reading a lot, and our earlier ideas were questioned by the new framework that we got. So we got very attracted. I never joined any party, but Marxism as a philosophy, as a political theory, became a core framework within which I started thinking. And along with me, many of my friends actually started thinking the same framework. So that was our first attraction towards that.
So you mentioned Professor Randeep Singh. If I'm not wrong, I think you mentioned once that you asked him that, if you got another life, if you get another life, what would you like to read? And I think, if I'm not wrong, his response was that I would like to read Indian intellectual tradition, Indian knowledge tradition. Taking from that, generally it has been assumed that Indian knowledge tradition is antithetical to Marxism, or Marxism cannot go hand in hand with the basic premise of Indian knowledge, which generally it is perceived as transcendental in domain, is very esoteric, and it is obscurantist rather in nature. So how do you see that? How do you see that claim? Do you think that that claim holds any ground?
No, that takes me to my journey into it, the question that you asked earlier. When I was impressed by Marxism, this question always remained in my mind, that how do we engage with Indian intellectual tradition and religion? As I could see that people were religious, and Marxism as a philosophy, at least which was prevalent in India at that time, the common sense Marxism I call it, that did not have any space for religion. So Randeep Singh gave that famous quotation to us that religion is opium of the masses, but heart of heartless society and soul of soulless, heart of heartless world and soul of soulless society. So that took me to this question of religion, started investigating about Marxist theory of religion, and that was a time when there was a movement of liberation theology in Nicaragua. So I got attracted towards that and worked on religion and Marxism and class, and particularly in the context of Nicaraguan liberation theology. So that gave some hope that we can find another theory of religion in Marx. And then I kept on working for many decades. In fact, I did my PhD on that. So that also gave me an idea that religion and philosophy are interconnected. And particularly in Indian context, the separation that has taken place in the West has not taken place in India. And Indian religion, Hindu religion as such, does not have the same framework with which the Europeans understand religion. So that took me to the question of Indian philosophy.
Yeah. So while reading your work, Gyan Ki Rajniti, Samaj Shastra, and Indian Knowledge Tradition, I've come across a very important distinction that you make between religion as spirituality, which is inclusive in nature, which is rather plural in its unfoldment, and religion as community and identity. Would you like to elaborate on that distinction that you make in that book?
Yes, if you look at Marxist theory of religion, um, one, of course, is the opium thesis, which has become very famous. But if you go deeper into it, you will find that Marx has written many things on religion. And if you pull them together and try to discover a kind of theoretical statement from that, you will find that there's a statement that is written in Capital Volume 1 that religious world is the reflex of the real world. So reflex basically mean in Hindi अन्योनाश्रय, जैसे कहते हैं कि दोनों एक दूसरे को फीड करता है या रिलेशनशिप है, ये बड़ा डीप रिलेशनशिप दोनों के बीच में है. फिर उससे यदि आप उसको एक्सप्लेन करने की कोशिश करो कि रिलीजन क्या चीज़ है, तो आपको पता चलेगा कि रिलीजन एज अ काइंड ऑफ conceptual framework that human beings get as human beings. What is the core idea of that? There, I think, is spirituality is a core idea. But when that religion comes into society, then there it gets converted into identity. So there are two dimensions of it. The idea that was very well explained by Engels in his early Christianity article, where he says that there is a religion of nature or natural religion and social religion. So natural religion is human beings' reflections on the forces of nature, whereas social religion it gets constituted in the power relationship. So religion as knowledge system is part of our engagement with nature, and we accumulate our knowledge about nature in the form of religion. That has happened for centuries with human beings, millennia in fact. And when it comes to society, then with the social dynamics, you find different forms of religion, social religion emerging, where the identity becomes sometimes very important.
So, if I get your point correctly, are you trying to argue that spirituality carries a component of relationality with it, and that relationality fits in with the relationality of human with nature as well as with the society? And spirituality can be transformative. In fact, it is actually transformative. But when it gets conflated with a certain logic of identity, which deals with binaries, then the problem of communalism start. Am I reading you
Yes,
correctly?
yes. Not only problem of communalism, but religion as opium, as Marx says, that also begins with this idea that in social religion, this spirituality, which is very natural to human being, gets transformed into what Ambedkar calls religion of rules and religion of principles. So, religion of principles is part of the spirituality framework. That gets transformed into religion of principles, that is a social religion framework. And between the two, the mediating factor is the class or the power relationship. So the moment religion of principle becomes religion of rules, then you find power dynamics in that. That is where the question of identity becomes very important.
Now, coming to this point of Indian intellectual tradition, it has generally been, if I'm not wrong, there are two sides. One side tries to valorize our past and tries to figure out a kind of mythological or mythical age of, golden era, and believes that whatever was there in the past was pristine and was great. The other side demonize our past and our tradition, Indian knowledge tradition. I think your perspective transcends both these binary logic. uh, can you elaborate on how your perspective transcends these two positions?
See, I think there are three reasons why we should engage with Indian intellectual tradition. The first one, I call it identity assertion model. The reason there is that you think that knowledge is part of your identity, knowledge tradition is part of your identity, which was humiliated during the regimes which came from outside. And with that humiliation, your community was also humiliated. So, therefore, this is a time to get back to that and regain that. So, it is less about the content of intellectual tradition, more about the identity of the community. That is one form. That is where they will claim that we had huge knowledge earlier and surgery and so many things they talk about. We do not know whether there is a truth in that or not. There is no proper documentation, there is no solid evidence, so we have no idea. But since we don't have any idea, we can't say it is true or false. But the project itself is problematic. The project is not knowledge but identity. The second model is decolonization model. What is there? They talk about how India was colonized by the British, and in the colonization process, there was serious epistemic violence, and we stopped thinking the way we were thinking earlier. We adopted others' method of thinking, the enemy's method of thinking. So the Orientalist argument. And that created a cognitive damage in us. So we can't think of ourselves as we were, but we start thinking of ourselves as alien. And that becomes a problem. Now, this is a serious issue, which I agree with this, that some kind of epistemic violence happened and cognitive damage happened. But then there is no proposal about how to go beyond this, how to really engage with that. There's a third position, which I agree with. The third position is that we do not need to engage with any knowledge tradition just because it was part of our identity, or since we were colonized and therefore we have to assert about it and we play the victimhood card, but for the reason that today humanity is in crisis and there's a serious crisis of different dimensions. For instance, economy is in crisis, capitalism is in crisis. Capitalism itself is facing a philosophical crisis as it has abandoned the idea of the common good. There's an ecological crisis. There is a relational crisis. There's a huge alienation. Loneliness has become such a major thing today. So, how do you come out from that? That is a problem for humanity, and therefore, and all the dominant models of thinking about humanity, understanding our problems, and thinking for future course of action, they have almost collapsed. So, this is the moment when humanity will have to look for new philosophy. And for that, we need to engage with knowledge traditions, all knowledge traditions. All knowledge traditions, I believe, are produced by human beings through their reflexive capacity in the process of their struggle to survive. So there are elements of truth everywhere. Not that they are all true, not that they are all correct, but there are elements, resources. So treating all these knowledge systems as resources from where we can appropriate things for constructing a future philosophy. For that, we need to engage with Indian intellectual tradition. And since we are in India, we have some exposure. We are born in the collective consciousness, so we have easy and natural access to those resources. So this is our duty to engage with them, to bring out resources which are important for humanity at the moment. If you go from the third perspective, then probably you will get rid of the identity politics of knowledge tradition. That is the perspective that I would agree with.
So, if I'm right, your perspective on decoloniality entails a universality and a critique of capitalism to its core, and
Yes.
an economic perspective that cannot be neglected in one way.
Yes, I would say that I believe in totalized ontology, as Rai Bhaskar calls it, that all the ontological layers are interconnected. And we can't understand culture without political economy. We can't understand political economy without culture. We have to find out what are the interconnections existing among them. That is our first assumption. Second, that, you know, uh, if you want to understand any intellectual tradition, you have to accept that these intellectual traditions were produced by different societies in different junctures. In today's time, we cannot understand the reality without having a framework to understand capitalism, which is a dominant mode of production. The frameworks that emerged in previous phases of human history may not have any tool to explain capitalism. So, therefore, we have to kind of put them together to develop something new to understand. Without understanding capitalism today, we cannot move an inch. But then, only understanding of capitalism will also not help us in transforming our society. So, therefore, this totalized ontology has to be our core idea.
Now, if we slightly digress from this Indian intellectual perspective, while reading your work, Jaan Ki Rajniti again, I've come across this idea of human nature in your work. And it seems that you are again trying to go beyond two binary positions. One, if I'm not wrong, is the position by certain kind of Marxists, structuralist Marxists, for instance, coming from Althusserian tradition, who tends to completely decries or denounce any paradigm that deals with human nature, along with certain post-structuralist trends that also are very, skeptical, cynical of human nature. But you emphasize human nature in your work, and creates this. You takes again from Indian intellectual tradition and argues that there are Purusharth and there are Vikar, and then tries to build your social theory and political theory through that. So why do you think that a complex and a comprehensive understanding of human nature is important for insightful knowledge of social and political reality?
देखो वरुण, मुझे लगता है क्या कि ये जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग है सोशल रियलिटी का, उसको ह्यूमन नेचर से शुरू करना उचित होगा. बहुत से मेरे दोस्त कहते हैं कि ह्यूमन नेचर से शुरू करना ठीक नहीं है क्योंकि ह्यूमन नेचर बदलता रहता है, which I agree with. Even Marx, if you look at Marx's EPM, Economic and Philosophical Manuscript, he begins with the idea of human nature, which is not like human nature of contractual theorists. Right? Contractual theorists are generalizing bourgeois human nature as human nature. What Marx does, he tries to find out the qualities of species being. इंसान जो जातिगत गुण है उसके, इंसानियत का जो उसका गुण है, उसके क्या क्या गुण है, उसको जब तक हम नहीं समझेंगे तो वो जो समाज बनाता है, वो जो काम करता है, उसको फिर समझना हमारे लिए मुश्किल होगा. तो हमें वहीं से शुरू करना पड़ेगा कि इंसान जो सोसाइटी बनाएगा उसका स्वभाव क्या है, वो कैसे सोचता है, क्या उसका ऑन्टोलॉजिकल कंपोजिशन क्या है. तो वहाँ मुझे लगता है कि जो पुरुषार्थ और विकार का थियरी है, ये एक फंडामेंटल कंट्रीब्यूशन है इंडियन इंटेलेक्चुअल ट्रेडिशन का. ऐसा नहीं है कि इसका ट्रेस और जगह नहीं मिलता है. जैसे मैंने मार्क्स के बारे में कहा, तो वहाँ भी जो थियरी ऑफ एलिनेशन है, वो 4 तरह का एलिनेशन है. वो एलिनेशन किस चीज़ से है? वो मनुष्य के स्वभाव से एलिनेशन है. मनुष्य स्वभाव से सामाजिक है, लेकिन वो गैर सामाजिक हो जाता है क्योंकि पूंजीवाद उसे गैर सामाजिक बना देता है. तो वो मौलिक स्वभाव उसका है. पुरुषार्थ, मुझे लगता है पुरुषार्थ और विकार एक ज़्यादा कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव थियरी है ह्यूमन नेचर का. जिसमें ये बात भी शामिल है कि उसमें एक डायनेमिज्म है। तो जैसे मैं कहता हूँ कि 4 पुरुषार्थ हैं और 6 विकार हैं। अर्थ, काम, धर्म, मोक्ष, और विकार हैं काम, क्रोध, लोभ, मद, मोह, ईर्ष्या। ये 10 होते हैं। एक तो मैं इसे अलग तरीके से डिफाइन करना चाहता हूँ। जैसे अर्थ का मतलब है ह्यूमन डिपेंडेंस ऑन नेचर। सो वी नीड रिसोर्सेज फ्रॉम नेचर फॉर आवर फिजिकल सर्वाइवल, राइट। तो हमारे सवाल ये होगा कि नेचर को हम कैसे मैनेज करें ताकि एक्सेसिबिलिटी टू नेचर हमारा आसान हो, हर किसी को मिल सके, केवल ह्यूमंस को नहीं बल्कि जो अदर लिविंग बीइंग्स हैं उनको भी एक्सेसिबिलिटी टू नेचर मिल सके। ये एक सवाल हमारे लिए होगा। तो अब जितने भी थियोरी, जितने भी मॉडल्स बने हैं ह्यूमंस को नेचर से कनेक्ट करने के लिए, उन मॉडल्स को हम एग्जामिन कर सकते हैं। उसी तरीके से काम का मतलब है कि जो बायोलॉजिकल बीइंग हमारा है और जो डिजायर्स बायोलॉजिकल बीइंग से बनता है वो कैसे रेगुलेट करेंगे, क्योंकि रिप्रोडक्शन भी हमारा डिजायर है, तो उसको रेगुलेट करने के लिए फिर हम इंस्टीट्यूशंस बनाते हैं। धर्म का मतलब है ह्यूमन बीइंग का जो नॉलेज है नेचर के बारे में, जिसके ज्ञान को हम अपने कामों, अपने व्यवहार का आधार बनाते हैं। वी मेक द नॉलेज ऑफ नेचर एज अ बेसिस फॉर आवर behavior. So we also create, on that basis, we create various institutions. And moksha, that is being conscious of consciousness. So going to the higher levels of consciousness. अब ये चारों जो हैं वो ऐसा नहीं कोई ऊपर है कोई नीचे है। जो पुराने ज़माने में लोग कहते थे कि मोक्ष अल्टीमेट एम है हमारा, जो है, क्योंकि हम कॉन्शियस बीइंग हैं, वही हमारी सबसे बड़ी खासियत है कि हम कॉन्शियस बीइंग हैं। तो कॉन्शियस बीइंग होना अपने आप में और क्लाइमेक्स ऑफ कॉन्शियस बीइंग होना, ये हमारा उद्देश्य हो सकता है, लेकिन ये चारों बराबर हैं, ये हमारा इंटीग्रल पार्ट है।
इसमें जो आपने एक जो सुदीप्तो कविराज के साथ जो आपकी बातचीत है उसमें एक बात निकल कर आती है कि आई थिंक वो कहते हैं कि प्रेम को भी वो एक पुरुषार्थ की तरह रखते हैं। जैसे आपने काम की बात करी तो काम का एक कॉनोटेशन आता है कि थोड़ा सेक्सुअल कॉनोटेशन है उसका, लेकिन अगर हम जैसे दूसरे भाव को देखें, जैसे वात्सल्य भाव हो गया, या जैसे आप खुद ही कहते हैं अनकंडीशनल लव का जो पूरा डिस्कोर्स है, तो आप उसमें कैसे देखते हैं कि प्रेम को एक अलग पुरुषार्थ रखने की जरूरत है या फिर उसको काम के
नहीं,
अंदर?
काम मेरे ख्याल से सेक्सुअल भाव नहीं है। सेक्सुअल जिसको आप सेक्स कहते हैं, जो फिजिकल इंटरकोर्स है या रिलेशनशिप है, ये एक एस्पेक्ट है उसका। काम हमारा बायोलॉजिकल बीइंग है जिससे हमारा डिजायर्स बनता है। तो हर तरह की जो इच्छाएं हमारी हैं वो काम के अंदर आता है। उसी में से एक इच्छा हमारी ये भी है कि हमारा प्रेम हम दूसरे ह्यूमन बीइंग के साथ करें। तो प्रेम को मुझे लगता है एक अलग पुरुषार्थ मान भी सकते हैं, लेकिन उसकी ज़रूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि काम के अंदर वो आ सकता है। काम की व्याख्या इतनी बड़ी है जिसमें वो समा सकता है। जैसे काम सूत्र यदि देखें वात्सायन का, तो आमतौर पर लोग समझते हैं काम सूत्र जो है वो सेक्स के का मैनुअल है। ऐसा नहीं है। काम सूत्र जो है वो मनुष्य के इच्छाओं को कैसे रेगुलेट करें उसके बारे में है। तो प्रेम भी उसमें आता है, और काम जो प्रेम का क्लाइमेक्स है, जो बीइंग बिकमिंग वन है, वो भी उसमें आता है। तो इसलिए मुझे लगता है उसकी ज़रूरत नहीं है, लेकिन यदि करना चाहें तो मुझे कोई इसमें एतराज़ नहीं होगा। जो विकार है, काम, क्रोध, लोभ, मद, मोह, मेरा ये मानना है कि वो भी हमारा इंटीग्रल पार्ट है, और ये 10 जो एलिमेंट हैं वो हमारे पर्सनालिटी को शेप करते हैं। अलग अलग टाइम और स्पेस में इनका सेटिंग अलग अलग हो सकता है। उदाहरण के लिए, यदि मैं यंग हूँ हो सकता है क्रोध मेरे अंदर ज़्यादा हो। यदि मैं बूढ़ा हो गया हूँ तो क्रोध की मात्रा कम हो जाए, लोभ की मात्रा कम हो जाए। तो ये डिपेंड करता है। जैसे जहाँ पे लॉ एंड ऑर्डर बहुत अच्छा है, रिसोर्सेज बहुत सारे हैं, तो वहाँ पे हमारा स्वभाव अलग होगा। जहाँ रिसोर्सेज कम है वहाँ अलग होगा। तो ये टाइम और स्पेस और ये 10 एलिमेंट्स, ये 12 जो चीज़ें हैं वो हमारे पर्सनालिटी को डिटरमिन करता है। और फिर हमारा उसी पर्सनालिटी से हम इंगेज करते हैं दूसरे लोगों के साथ। तो मेरा सवाल ये है कि क्या इन एलिमेंट्स को यदि हम इंटीग्रल पार्ट ऑफ ह्यूमन बीइंग मानते हैं तो उसके आधार पे किसी सिद्धांत का निर्माण किया जा सकता है कि नहीं, सामाजिक सिद्धांत का निर्माण किया जा सकता है कि नहीं। क्योंकि जो वेस्ट में हुआ है उसमें क्या हुआ है कि एक ही एलिमेंट को लेकर हमने थियराइज कर दिया उन्होंने, तो वो थियराइजेशन लॉपसाइडेड हो जाता है, वो थियराइजेशन अधूरा रह जाता है। तो अब ये बड़ा टास्क है क्योंकि इसमें वेरिएबल्स बहुत बढ़ जाते हैं। इतने वेरिएबल्स को एक साथ लेके चलना पॉसिबल है कि नहीं, ये समझ आना बहुत मुश्किल है, लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से ये हो सकता है। और इस किताब में मैंने यही प्रयास किया है देखने का कि कहाँ तक वो जा सकता है।
बिल्कुल, आई थिंक जैसे आप अपनी एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण लेख में लिखते हुए हैं, कैपिटलिज्म फेसिंग अ फिलोसॉफिकल क्राइसिस, की जब एडम स्मिथ और डेविड रिकार्डो वगैरह जो कल्पना कर रहे हैं, अवधारणा कर रहे हैं कैपिटलिज्म की, उसमें वो ग्रीड को सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट मान रहे हैं। लेकिन उस वक्त आप ये भी कहते हैं कि उसमें एक आइडिया ऑफ कलेक्टिव भी था, जिसमें आप आज बोलते हैं कि आज का जो पूंजीवाद है उसको उस कलेक्टिव की ज़रूरत नहीं है। उस कंटेक्स्ट में अगर देखा जाए तो और भी ऐसे राइटर हैं जो बोलते हैं कि जिसे हम कहते हैं ट्रेजेडी ऑफ कॉमन्स, जो कि एक आइडिया पे बेस्ड है कि कलेक्टिव जो होता है वो रिसोर्स को ख़त्म कर देता है, तो इसलिए प्राइवेटाइजेशन कर देना चाहिए। लेकिन उसके निस्बत हमें एलिजनोर ऑस्ट्रॉम वगैरह के भी काम मिलते हैं जो बोलते हैं कि कलेक्टिव के अंदर या कम्युनिटी के अंदर भी ऐसा डायनामिक होता है जो उस कलेक्टिव को पनपने देता है। तो उस नज़रिए से देखें तो आपका क्या, उसमें आप उस डिबेट में आप कैसे देखते हैं उस डिबेट को?
मुझे लगता है कि कलेक्टिव की जो समस्या है उसकी आधी समस्या ये है कि हम चाहते हैं कि कैपिटलिस्ट मोरालिटी में सोशलिस्ट सिस्टम आ जाए। ये मुश्किल होता है। अभी जो कैपिटलिस्ट मोरालिटी बना हुआ है पूरा, उसके लिए जिसमें इंडिविजुअलिज्म है, जिसमें कॉपीराइट का डिमांड है, जिसमें कंपटीशन है, जिसमें कंज्यूमरिज्म है, यदि ये हमारा डोमिनेंट फ्रेम ऑफ थिंकिंग है तब ट्रेजेडी ऑफ कॉमन्स होना आम बात है। लेकिन यदि हम इस डोमिनेंट ट्रेंड ऑफ थिंकिंग से अलग हट जाएं, दूसरा ट्रेंड शुरू करें, दूसरी तरह सोचना शुरू करें, तो कॉमन्स हमारे लिए एक बहुत बड़ा रिसोर्स हो सकता है। उदाहरण के लिए जो मॉन्ड्रिगन एक्सपेरिमेंट की मैं बात करता हूँ, जहाँ के कोऑपरेटिव बना है, तो उस कोऑपरेटिव के पीछे, सफल होने के पीछे एक बड़ी बात यह है कि उसमें एक एथिक्स का पूरा कोड बनाया गया है और उस एथिकल कोड के चलते वो कोऑपरेटिव सफल है, यानी सोचने का फ्रेम बदल जाता है। और इसीलिए मैं बार बार कहता हूँ कि स्पिरिचुअलिज्म एक इम्पॉर्टेंट एलिमेंट है हमारा, जो बीइंग कॉन्शियस ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस है, जो इंसान की खास बात है कि हम कैपेबल हैं इस बात के लिए कि हम अपनी चेतना के बारे में सचेत हो सकते हैं और वो बहुत ऊपर तक जा सकते हैं उसमें। तो यदि हम उस लेवल पे पहुंचते हैं जब हमारी चेतना इंसानियत की चेतना से मिल जाता है, ये जो संगम होता है, उसके बाद हमारा स्वभाव बदल जाता है, फिर हमारा सोचने का तरीका बदल जाता है। यदि उस लेवल पे, जिसे एनलाइटनमेंट कहते हैं, यदि एनलाइटेंड लोगों का सोसाइटी हो तो ट्रेजेडी ऑफ कॉमन्स नहीं होगा।
बिल्कुल, इसमें जैसे एक पॉइंट जो इम्पोर्टेंट निकल कर आता है, आप स्पेस एंड टाइम को बहुत एम्फसाइज़ करते हैं अपने काम में और बोलते हैं कि एक टेम्पोरल फ्रेमवर्क इम्पोर्टेंट है। जैसे अगर क्राइसिस के वक़्त आप उस अवधारणा के साथ नहीं चल सकते, जैसे इमेजिन करिए कम्युनल राइट हो रहे हैं, तो आपका वो कम्युनिटी डायनामिक बहुत स्ट्रांगली निकल कर आएगा, जो जनरली एक पीसफुल सिनेरियो में हमें उस तरीके का नहीं दिखेगा। तो आप ये मानते हैं कि जो स्पेस एंड टाइम है, जिसमें हम मटेरियल डायमेंशन को भी ले आते हैं, जैसे पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी जिसे कहते हैं, वो भी एक बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट रोल प्ले करती है। हमारे नेचर किस तरीके से अनफोल्ड होगा या किस तरीके से वो पुरुषार्थ की तरफ ज़्यादा झुकेगा या विकार की तरफ ज़्यादा झुकेगा।
वरुण, मुझे लगता है कि पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी हमें एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट देता है, जिसे मैं कहता हूँ ये मटेरियल मैट्रिक्स, इसमें हम ऑपरेट करते हैं। तो जैसे मैंने बताया कि यदि हम उस समाज में रहते हैं जहाँ बहुत अभाव है, तो ओबियसली विकार उसमें प्रेवलेंट होगा। जैसे पूंजीवाद है, तो पूंजीवाद तो विकार पे ही काम करता है ना, वो हमारे विकारों को उजागर करता है। बार बार जो एडवर्टीजमेंट्स यदि आप देखें, जो एडवर्टीजमेंट क्या करता है, वो हमारे लोभ को उजागर करता है। वो लोभ पे ही पूरा बना हुआ है। जैसे मैंने बताया कि ग्रीड इज गुड, ये एडम स्मिथ के पहले लंबा पोएम बिना नाम के आया था, जिसका कोर आइडिया ये था कि ग्रीड इज गुड, जो कैपिटलिज्म का बेसिस हो गया। तो ग्रीड के आधार पे ये पूरा सिस्टम टिका हुआ है, तो ओब्वियसली वहाँ विकार का प्रिविलेंस होना आसान है। ये एनलाइटेंड लोगों का समाज नहीं होगा यदि हम ग्रीड पे बेस्ड हैं, लेकिन यदि ग्रीड को हटा के हम सेवा पे चले जाएं, जैसे गांधी कहते थे कि नेचर हैज एनफ फॉर नीड बट नॉट फॉर ग्रीड। तो गांधी का क्रिटिक है कैपिटलिज्म का ये कि ग्रीड बेस्ड सिस्टम जो आपने बनाया है वो सर्वाइव नहीं कर सकता है, क्योंकि नेचर डज नॉट हैव एनफ टू गिव यू। तो उस फ्रेम ऑफ थिंकिंग को बदलना पड़ेगा यदि आप चाहते हैं कि ट्रेजेडी ऑफ कॉमन्स नहीं हो। और यही सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है आज ह्यूमैनिटी के सामने कि इस फ्रेम ऑफ थिंकिंग को कैसे बदले। इसलिए मैं कहता हूँ कि जब तक हम स्पिरिचुअलिटी को पॉलिटिक्स से नहीं जोड़ते हैं तब तक इस फ्रेम को चेंज करना पॉसिबल नहीं है। इफ यू वांट टू चेंज द फ्रेम, you will have to acknowledge the ethical agency of human being. You have to acknowledge that human beings are spiritual beings. They are capable of going beyond their material interest. If they can do that, then there can be a politics of unconditional love. And that is the search for humanity. How do we arrive there? I think nobody knows how do you do it. At the moment, it looks to be absolutely impossible and utopian. But probably this is the utopia for which humanity will have to struggle a lot in future.
Absolutely. Taking this into consideration, I've also come across this term called ethical realism in your work. If I'm not wrong, you argues that realism is the paradigm that you tries to work upon. You don't take, idealism as your position, nor you take materialism. If we, go deeper into this question of what realism is, what reality is, we tend to come across many debates. For instance, there are materialists, including dialectical materialists, who would say that reality fundamentally is materialist in nature, and then it unfolds in a dialectical fashion, and consciousness is secondary, epiphenomenal. When we see idealists, we see the other trend wherein they would say that everything is consciousness and material reality is a reflection of that consciousness. And in your paradigm, argues that, in fact, if I'm not wrong, you take both into consideration and you tries to argue that they exist in an entangled fashion, materiality and consciousness. And you also tries to bring in a moral framework, that we are moral beings and morality is sort of innate in that sense. And morality is trans-historical in nature. It goes, a certain aspect of our morality is trans-historical. It goes beyond temporal and spatial divisions. Do you think that this framework holds ground when we see the contemporary debates in philosophy of mind and in other traditions? How much do you think it holds?
I think yes. You know better than me on this, I guess. This idea that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the material reality, this is not sustainable. In fact, this idea does not allow you to take consciousness very seriously. I think the multi-layered ontology, as Raghavascar calls it, suggests that they are all part of same reality, but at different layers. And each layer has its own specific quality. Not that they are not real, not that they are unreal. They are very much real, but they are different. Now, to understand them, you have to have different epistemologies. From the epistemology of physics, you cannot understand consciousness. And from epistemology of consciousness, you cannot understand physical laws. So we have to develop different epistemologies, and there has to be dialogue, of course, among the epistemologies, as they are also interconnected ontologically. Once you do that, once you accept that, then you will see that how they are entangled. Consciousness and the material world, how they are entangled, and how they are transforming each other. The reflex relationship between the two is very deep, and therefore, if you treat human beings as integrated being, who is a physical being, chemical being, biological being, and also psychological being. So, psychological being is not isolated, separated. The earlier framework would treat human beings as all three but not psychological. So now it is acceptable that our body also transforms depending on our consciousness. Right, the new different developments in
That's called
neuroscience,
psychokinesis.
psychokinesis, all these things suggest that we are one,
Yeah.
and there is a kind of relationship between everything. So that gives us a model of understanding where you don't separate, that this Cartesian dualism does not work anymore. And this is a change in paradigm. And this paradigm is gradually taking shape, and I'm sure a lot of debate will take place in this. And let me also tell you, Varun, that this is what brings me to Indian intellectual tradition. I think this Cartesian dualist moment did not happen in Indian intellectual tradition. And therefore, you have a lot of resources which can help you in comprehending this entanglement.
Yeah.
And that is why it is very important.
Coming to this question of Marxism again, you, if I'm not wrong, you tries to build a new paradigm of understanding Marxism through philosophy of science. It might sound a bit puzzling to lay readers who are new to Marxism that why do we need to go into philosophy of science to understand a social theory, which Marxism is? Can you overcome this confusion?
See, this is very simple. What I'm trying to do with Marxism is trying to develop an immanent critique of Marxism, which means that I'm trying to look for a space within Marxist epistemology to open its epistemology. So, obviously, if I start critiquing Marxism from outside, then nothing will change internally. So, my struggle has been to engage with my Marxist friends and tell them that let us try to read Marx and find out what are the spaces through which we can engage with Indian intellectual tradition, religion, and that if I don't do it with philosophy of science, then Marxist scholars will not take that seriously. So I want to go into the debates in philosophy of science and try to see that how within Marxism there has been a debate on philosophy of science, and since there's a dialogue between philosophy and philosophy of science in Marxism, there is space open. With the new developments in science, we need to continuously engage in that debate. That gives us immense capacity to unfold Marxism further, to treat Marxism as also a method to arrive on philosophy.
And you assert this with the caveat that this is not positivism.
This is not positivism. In fact, I'm against positive. I'm suggesting that Marx is not positivist. And this does not stop me from arriving on similar theories through other means. I may completely arrive on a similar theory through, say, philosophy of mind. So, my understanding is that there is a circle of reality. There can be various entry points in that. Marx decides to enter there through political economy. One can decide to enter there through philosophy of mind also, but everybody has to complete the circle. So that interconnectedness has to be always there.
Now, due to paucity of time, I have to come to two important questions that are there. Again, reading your work, I come across this idea of liberation theology that is very important in your work. And you try to make a distinction between religion of principle and religion of rule, which of course is there in Ambedkar's framework also. Getting into this question seriously, I always wonder that it seems that liberation theology that was prominent in Latin America, then experiment between Marxism and Christianity, it sometimes seems that this experiment somehow did not fulfill or actualize the potential that it had in Indian context. Although we know that in nationalist movement, many people and many freedom fighters were there who were taking idea of religion very seriously and trying to develop a liberatory potential of religion. But why do you think that this whole paradigm of liberation liberation theology, especially engaging with Hindu tradition, is missing right now in contemporary context?
I have a feeling that this idea of liberation theology emerged in its content, if not in its form, during the Indian freedom struggle. Look at these three thinkers, Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Tagore. None of them opposed religion. None of them said that religion should be banned. All of them said that religion is very important, right? And then what did they do? Did they do with religion? If you look at K.M. Sen's book on Hinduism, the book was written by K.M. Sen on request by Tagore, or Tagore's book on religion of man. The content of that book will suggest that they are looking for what I call a Muktikami religion. Right. Similarly, if you look at Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, he says that what is religion? दया धर्म को मूल है, यही धर्म है. तुलसीदास को कोट करते हैं. या अंबेडकर कहते हैं कि रिलीजन ऑफ रूल्स एंड रिलीजन ऑफ प्रिंसिपल्स. तो इसका मतलब है कि सर्च चल रहा था. इस पॉलिटिकल स्ट्रगल में जब लोग लगे हुए थे, उस समय लोगों ने रियलाइज किया कि जो हिंदुइज्म यहाँ पे है, उसके अंदर एक कंजर्वेटिज्म है जो स्ट्रक्चर्स ऑफ डोमिनेशन बने हुए हैं उसको होल्ड करता है, उसको सस्टेन करता है. तो रिलीजन को एड्रेस करना पड़ेगा, बिना उसको रिजेक्ट किए हुए, बिना उसको खारिज किए हुए उसको एड्रेस करना पड़ेगा. उसके अंदर जो पोटेंशियल है, जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव पोटेंशियल है, उसको रियलाइज करना पड़ेगा. तो मुझे लगता है कि भारतीय स्वतंत्रता संग्राम के दरमियान ये बातें हो रही थी. दिक्कत ये हुई है कि उसके बाद जब पार्टीशन हुआ हमारा, तो एक साइकोलॉजी बन गई हमारे बुद्धिजीवियों के बीच में या राजनीतिज्ञों के बीच में कि धर्म पे बात नहीं करनी है. मज़े की बात है कि आज भी एक कॉन्फ्रेंस होना है आईआईसी में, वहाँ कह रहे हैं कि टाइटल में स्पिरिचुअलिटी रख लीजिए, रिलीजन मत रखिए. मैंने कहा क्यों? तो उसमें बहुत कंट्रोवर्सी हो सकता है. तो ये आश्चर्य की बात है. हिंदुस्तान के यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ रिलीजियस स्टडीज़ नहीं है, जबकि पूरी दुनिया में, यूरोप में, अमेरिका में डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ रिलीजियस स्टडीज़ है. तो हमने वो इग्नोर किया उस चीज़ को. जो हमने हमारा गेन था रिलीजन को समझने में, जो हमारा गेन था, वो हमने उसको एनकैश नहीं किया.
आपको लगता है इसमें कि जैसे पूंजीवाद का जो आज का डेवलपमेंट हुआ है, जो हम जैसे स्पिरिचुअलिटी को देखते हैं या धर्म को भी देखें, तो बिग कैपिटल ने बहुत बड़े लेवल पर अप्रोप्रिएशन करा है इसमें. अगर हम रॉय भास्कर का काम देखें तो वो अपने कामों में लिखते हैं कि एक ज़रूरत है जिसमें हम न्यू लेफ्ट का जो क्रिटिकल इंसाइट्स हैं और जो न्यू एज स्पिरिचुअलिटी के स्पिरिचुअल इंसाइट्स हैं उसको कहीं ना कहीं जोड़ने की ज़रूरत है. लेकिन उसमें एक जो बड़ा कॉम्प्लेक्स मामला जो आता है वो है कि हम कैपिटल के साथ क्या करें. क्योंकि आज हम जो देखते हैं, जो धर्म गुरु हैं, वो भी सारे एक तरीके से सारे बड़ी पूंजी के सपोर्टर हैं या बड़ी पूंजी के लिए ही वो स्पिरिचुअलिटी कर रहे हैं, आम आदमी की स्पिरिचुअलिटी का डोमेन में नहीं देखते हैं. तो इस जो पूंजीवाद का जो आज का जो स्वरूप है, उसको कैसे रोका या उसको कैसे समझा जा सकता है?
देखो, 3 तरह के मूवमेंट्स अभी हमें दिखते हैं. एक तो है फंडामेंटलिस्ट रिलीजियस मूवमेंट जो आइडेंटिटी पॉलिटिक्स करता है. एक है जो न्यू रिलीजियस मूवमेंट है जो स्पिरिचुअलिटी को लेके चलता है, और जो फूको कहता है टेक्नोलॉजी द सेल्फ, उसके थ्रू वो लोगों को अट्रैक्ट करता है. तो पहला जो आंदोलन है आइडेंटिटी मूवमेंट, रिलीजन एज आइडेंटिटी मूवमेंट, वो तो निश्चित रूप से जो सत्तासीन लोग हैं उससे बहुत क्लोज होगा, क्योंकि उनकी सत्ता को बनाए रखने के लिए वो काम करता है. ये आश्चर्य की बात नहीं है कि ठीक उसी समय जब हिंदुस्तान में न्यू लिबरल इकोनॉमी बढ़ रहा था, उसी समय आइडेंटिटी पॉलिटिक्स भी बढ़ रहा है, कम्युनलिज्म भी बढ़ रहा है. तो कहीं ना कहीं इसने उसे सहायता भी किया है, न्यू लिबरल इकोनॉमी को, कैपिटलिज्म को हेल्प किया है. दूसरा जो मूवमेंट है न्यू रिलीजियस मूवमेंट, वो एक तरह से शॉक ऑब्जर्वर का काम करता है. जो एलिनेशन सोसाइटी में हो रहा है, तो जो टेक्नोलॉजी जो सेल्फ है उसके थ्रू ये लोग थोड़ा उनको सोलेज देने की का काम करते हैं. लेकिन एक तीसरा मूवमेंट भी है जो लिबरेशन थियोलॉजी या मुक्तिकामी रिलीजन है, जिसमें एक स्ट्रगल की बात हो रही है, जिसमें धर्म को छोड़ने की बात नहीं हो रही है, रेडिकल स्पिरिचुअलिटी जिसको आप कह सकते हैं. तो आगे आने वाला जो भी संघर्ष होगा पूंजीवाद के खिलाफ, वो बिना रेडिकल स्पिरिचुअलिटी के नहीं होगा। तो जो मार्क्सवादी आंदोलन है या समाजवादी आंदोलन है, जैसा भी आंदोलन पूंजीवाद के खिलाफ होना है, उसमें स्पिरिचुअलिटी के साथ उसे कनेक्ट करना पड़ेगा। और ये बात हम अच्छी तरह से गांधी, अंबेडकर और टैगोर से सीख सकते हैं।
Coming to the last question, you mentioned partition. Partition had a huge impact on the psychological, basis of our existence. And in your early work, you have also talked about the idea of social healing. In fact, you have written a book, edited a book on social healing. How important this method is right now in contemporary times when we are facing that communalism is at its peak, and there is lack of dialogue between communities, and how we can foster social healing and how social healing can act as a panacea to the communal problem that we are facing right now.
वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग क्वेश्चन। मुझे लगता है कि हमें इस बात को एक्नॉलेज करना पड़ेगा कि जब भी कम्युनिटीज़ आपस में मिलते हैं, यदि उनके मिलने में वायलेंस है, तो उनके सबकॉन्शियस माइंड में या कॉन्शियस माइंड में वो वायलेंस अपनी जगह बना बैठा है। अंदर तक वो घाव, हमारे गहरे घाव पड़ा हुआ है। जैसे पार्टीशन हुआ है, तो पार्टीशन के बाद भले ही शांति हो गई हो, बट द काइंड ऑफ woundedness that was there, that remained there in minds of the people. And it is possible to use that for political purpose. Therefore, we really have to address this question. We have to engage with that. The insecurity that communities have, those insecurities were pushed behind the carpet. The social healing project asserts that those insecurities will have to be brought on the table and discussed, and develop frameworks to handle that, so that you heal people. It's not tolerance of one religion or other religion. It's a respect for a religion. So dialogue में ये possible हो पाएगा कि हम उन चीज़ों को लोकेट करें जो हम एक दूसरे को, जिससे तकलीफ हो रही है, उस तकलीफ को कैसे हम ख़त्म करें, कैसे हम उससे बाहर निकलें, इसके ऊपर हम काम करेंगे। इसलिए डायलॉग बहुत ज़रूरी है। तो एक्नॉलेजिंग द वायलेंस, एक्नॉलेजिंग द प्रॉब्लम्स दैट वी फेस ड्यू टू दैट वायलेंस, एंड देन मूविंग बियॉन्ड दैट, जो एक मॉडल ट्रूथ एंड रिकन्सिलिएशन का साउथ अफ्रीका में था, वैसा ही कोई मॉडल हमें सोचना पड़ेगा कि हम कंटिन्यूअस डायलॉग का ये प्रोसेस चलाएं। गांधी ने बहुत बार इसको इनिशिएट किया था। गांधी की इस बात को लोग समझ नहीं पा रहे थे कि वो डायलॉग की ज़रूरत कैसे है। तो मुझे लगता है कि हीलिंग प्रोजेक्ट इस वक्त बहुत ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि जो हमारा डिफरेंस है, जो हमारे बीच में वो वुंडेडनेस है, जो हमारे बीच में घाव है, उस घाव को पॉलिटिकली जो रूलिंग क्लासेस हैं वो यूज करें।
How important do you think is dialogical engagement in terms of metaphysics, in terms of religious metaphysics? For instance, आप बोलते हैं कि दरअसल दारा शिकवा के बाद उस तरीके का एंगेजमेंट, थियोलॉजिकल एंगेजमेंट मिसिंग हो गया, और आज भी हम जो कम्युनिटीज़ के दरमियान एंगेजमेंट देखते हैं वो मुझे लगता है कि सुपरफिशियल लेवल पे होता है। फॉर इंस्टेंस, अगर हम आइडिया ऑफ लाइफ की बात करें या आइडिया ऑफ गॉड की बात करें, तो आज आई हैव नॉट कम अक्रॉस मेनी इंस्टेंसेस वेयर a Hindu theologian or a Muslim theologian engaging on core concepts of Hinduism and Islam. So do you think that there is an important component of these abstract questions that were there, that were prominent in earlier times, but somehow with a certain kind of secularism that India adopted, these questions were put under the basket and these questions were relegated to the margin?
Absolutely. I think that India has a huge tradition of such dialogues. I always recall 6th century BC Vaishali, where Buddhism, Jainism, and materialism, this Charvaki philosophy, they were existing together, and they were in deep dialogue. And Jainism developed a philosophy called Anekantvad. It was for reconciliation, philosophical reconciliation, acknowledging after debate that, well, let us agree to disagree. But the dialogue should continue. Nobody can arrive on truth, final truth. Truth is always partial. We can always partially arrive on the truth. And therefore, our dialogue should continue. I think Such dialogues have happened in Indian case many times. You can see 3rd century BC, 4th century BC when Greeks came here. There was a deep dialogue between them. 4th century AD when this Gupta Empire was there. Buddhism and Hinduism were in a deep dialogue. So there are traditions of dialogue. I think Islam and Hinduism, the dialogue was happening, mediated by Sufism. And Darashiko was one of the major actors in that. Somehow that dialogue stopped.
The development of Sikhism was one of the.
The development of Sikhism was there. Baul tradition is another example. There are several traditions that emerged. Dialogue between Nyaya and Buddhism produced Nava Nyaya tradition. So this has been there, and epistemologically we are innovating due to that. This stopped, and then the Britishers came, and this new regime, the British government or British colonial power, that did not encourage this dialogue. And therefore, it was stopped after that, though a new dialogue started between Hinduism and Christianity, between modern
But
liberal
that was under the
philosophy and
lens of
Hinduism.
Orientalism mostly.
Yes, but there were many trends in that. There were also other trends. One Orientalism was one trend, but there were other trends also where rethinking within Hinduism was going on. So Vivekananda was one who was completely rethinking in a new way. So this rethinking, this dialogue was transforming each other. Addressing these questions were very important. I think that process stopped after independence.
Yeah.
And that should be started immediately. And therefore, imagining a center of study on religion or something is extremely important in this chapter.
Thank you. Coming to this last question, because this is again a very important question. Uh, the Creative Theory Association that you have been founding member of, most of the people when they hear this term creative theory, they tend to use it interchangeably with critical theory. They tend to obscure the refined distinction that are there. So can you explain the minute difference between how creative theory is different from critical theory? And obviously creativity entails criticality, but is there something beyond?
I think so. Critical theory did not have exposure to this debate on ontology. Of course, they realized that Marxism has big limitation as it does not have an epistemology of consciousness or very limited epistemology of consciousness. Therefore, a dialogue between Marxism and psychoanalysis was needed. That is what happened. They started there. That's the critical theory all about. But it did not open up the space for engaging with other knowledge traditions. So, creative theory has three aspects. One, engaging with different knowledge traditions. It's open completely for engagement. Two, it does not give up universals. It believes in universal, but it questions all universals. And it works for emergentist universal, that with constant debate, new universal will keep emerging. And third thing, that it actually wants to be a grounded theory, transformative theory,
So the
engaging with the concrete realities.
confluence of theory and practice.
Exactly. Transforming that always. So creativity comes from these engagements. And therefore it also invites people from art, literature, music, religion, philosophy, physics, all disciplines we invite, and from all over the world. So it's open for everybody. So somebody talks about tribal epistemology, not to eulogize that, but to engage with the epistemology, finding out the limits, finding out the strength, and engaging and kind of bringing that together to create a new universe.
So the interdisciplinary engagement, including disciplines of physics, science, and philosophy.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for these creative and insightful responses, Professor Thakur. And with this, we end our second session of Vimarsh. And I hope it would have been. I hope it was important and an insightful discussion. Uh, Please stay tuned, and we will have another such discussions in the coming future. Thank you so much.